why our mind is never at equipoise is because our mind is taken out of its seat, according to the understanding, by the incessant activity of the senses. So mind, as it were, gets dissuaded. Instead of being what it is, reflecting the rays of Absolute from pristine surface of what mind is, and it's one of those very rich in its connotations and complexity Sanskrit term, Samavesha. I've put down some of the principal terms, how it can be translated into English, just for your interest, just for you to have this as a so Samavesha as it's composed of two sounds, Sama and Vesha, and sometimes the sounds are broken Samavesha, Samavisha. In some cases you will come across transliterations which will indicate that it's Samvesh. Entering or abiding together, that's one. Association, that's two. The third one, comprehension. Fourth meaning, penetration, absorption into. Number 5, possession. And number 6, passion, emotion. So, in our immersion, in our work here, we will give primarily attention to the 3 of its meanings. We will go into the exploration of Samavesha as penetration, Samavesha as immersion, and Samavesha as possession. So we will give attention to these 3 aspects that this term represents. But before we go into it, let's just maybe give a little bit to the etymology itself. And in fact, both. We just did it to the Sanskrit, let's give justice to English as well. Let's not just take it all for granted that somehow we all now, by large, converse in English language on a daily basis, most of us. And I think it will be good to revisit, and why that is. The reasons for that are few, but 2 are principal. For example, from the standpoint of how Kashmir Shaivism views what is spoken of as avidya, that ignorance, that the culprit of ignorance, why, for example, it is not granted that we simply identify with that what illumines every experience. In other words, why don't we identify with awareness? Why do we identify with the body? Why do we think ourselves as being so and so? So far, this is a shared ground, we could say, across many, many traditions throughout the centuries and millennia. West, East, perennial traditions all speak to that, often spoken of in terms of misidentification or superimposition. Yoga goes into that in great length. Yoga has been with us now since the 60s, but really firmly since the 90s. Already at the end of the 90s, I have read some statistics that some 40 million people in North America alone seriously practice yoga. By the year 2000, yoga industry was considered to be billion worth of yearly turnover business. And yet, the yogic philosophy really is not so much about what we know as yoga asanas, and there's a new term even entered in American vernacular so as to distinguish, prompted by passionate scholars to defend the purity of the teaching, postural yoga. There's a term. So in other words, if you speak about yoga on the mat, doing asanas in a class, when teacher guides the class, it's postural yoga, based primarily on postures. But the essence of yoga philosophy, of course, is that, as it's rooted in Samkhya philosophy. Please raise your hands, those of you who have heard us speaking about it, me speaking about it, or you reading independently on the philosophy of Samkhya. Please raise your hands, everything. All right, maybe another way around. Those who do not know what Samkhya is. Wow. We spoke about Samkhya a lot. You just need to remember. Okay, well, it doesn't stop us on our tracks, no worries. Just very quickly, Samkhya is a philosophy, right, of one of the 6 systems or 6 classical systems of Indian philosophy, altogether known as darshanas. The darshanas comprise of pairs. In other words, the philosophies, these 6 philosophies, they come in pairs to complete the loop of knowledge, to complete that loop of knowledge. The first pair is Nya and Vaisheshika. Nya and Vaisheshika, which deals with correct inference and enumeration. Before going into any inquiry, before going into any study, before going into anything, that's what is being dealt with in any discipline. If you look into that, anything you want to study, you would have to implement or introduce a proper means of inquiry. In other words, to know how to even posit the questions to address something. And enumeration, what is it made of? Enumeration. Then it's followed by another pair, Samkhya and Yoga. They come in pairs. Samkhya is a metaphysical view of reality, and Yoga is the direct verification of that metaphysical view of reality through experiential means. And finally, Karma Mimamsa and Vedanta. These are the final 2 pairs. Karma Mimamsa deals with injunctions. It deals with the full gamut of how everything works, and Karma Mimamsa. And Advaita Vedanta. Karma Mimamsa deals with injunctions. How to appease this part of, let's say, how to appease planets, the whole science of special procedures from certain precious to semi-precious stones, how they impact our electromagnetic field and so forth, to how to recite the mantras, to all this. And finally, Advaita Vedanta, as we have spoken, is considered to be culmination of the Vedas, or culmination of the knower and the known, And that's what Advaita Vedanta represents. It's the culmination where all this is left behind. Samkhya here plays a very important role because Samkhya is one of those most referred to of all Indian philosophies. And although it is dualistic in nature, and it is dualistic, in a nutshell, Samkhya deals with two categories, or two principles. That of Purusha, which stands for spirit, Purusha, and that of Prakriti, which stands for nature. Absolute reality and phenomenal reality. And in Samkhya, the relationship between Purusha and Prakriti is such that they do not interact. Purusha remains aloof. Although, according to that philosophy, Prakriti has its origin in Purusha, but then she gains her own independence, as it were. And then everything just reigns from there on in terms of following its nature. Ayurveda is rooted in Samkhya philosophy. And study of Ayurveda is impossible without the study of the principal forms of energy with which nature expresses itself, known as Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva stands for equilibrium, Rajas stands for motion, movement, heat, and Tamas stands for inertia, structure. These are principal laws. Even if we are translating this into scientific language, then we'll have something like Sattva would represent electromagnetism. It holds everything together. The force of electromagnetism. Rajas, heat, weak and strong interactions. And Tamas, gravity. So these are fundamental laws of nature. It's very well known. So Prakriti expresses itself through these laws of nature, through these primordial forces of nature, and everything is made out of this nature. And everything follows that. Everything. Everything. So there is a moment, or the hour, or the time of Sattva, there's a time of Rajas, there's a time of Tamas. When you wake up in the morning, you're in a sattvic mode. It's granted, you're in a sattvic phase. The day kicks in, sun is at the zenith, most activity, we're most active at that time. That's the domain of the Raja Guna. Towards the evening, we all start to get drowsy and lazy and tired, and our attention is not as sharp unless 4 cups of coffee drunk or something. So, hour of Tamaguna, everything follows that. Everything in nature is that. So that's at least how then Ayurvedic physician goes to determine and work further when it goes at the level of the elementary order of creation, where the mixture of the elements create the impurity, pollutes the elements, and they're known as doshas. This is just in a nutshell. So Ayurveda rooted in Samkhya. So Samkhya is very important, period. There's no such thing as study of Indian spirituality without Samkhya, any of its parts. A lot of modern teachers dismiss it all. The teacher who I constantly try to call off by his bluff out there, for example, most recently released a video where he says that consciousness has no dimensions. It's dimensionless. It's at best confusing. Consciousness is dimensionless. Has no dimensions. We will talk about it later. This knowledge somehow was more present in the 60s. This was more present, more available, and more around in the 60s and the 70s. But non-duality washed it all off because it was considered to be important, irrelevant, cluttering your mind. You are awareness, aware of awareness, and that's it. That's what enlightenment is. What is enlightenment? Ask me this question. Are you aware right now? Are you aware? No, I'm asking, not like a hypothetically. Are you aware that you are sitting here? Okay? And anything else that you're aware of?
What is seen?
So you're aware. Aware, are you aware now? Right? So that's it, you're enlightened. You can spend the rest of the retreat more kind of like on holiday in Mexico. That's your last retreat, you're enlightened. Who wants to be next enlightened? I mean, I know it's fun, right? But I call it like teachers shoot themselves in the foot, right? But forget about it. Samkhya philosophy is important. You go and study Ayurveda, you would have to have crashed course of what Ayurveda is rooted in. It deals with these very important principles to understand even when am I feeling completely and utterly in sync, in harmony with everything. Well, that means that there is enough of accumulation of sattva. In Indian spirituality, it is referred to as nearest to Brahman. Nearest to Brahman. Hang on a second, don't get confused. Some of you read Bhagavad Gita, and there are verses. Nistrai guno bhavarjuna. Go beyond the gunas, O Arjuna. Nistrai guno bhavarjuna. In other words, go beyond the three gunas. Yes, our job is to go beyond the three gunas, beyond the sattva, rajas, and tamas, for sure. But as far as building that and accumulating that, what serves us in the long run, all systems of Indian philosophy, all sages always understood it is the sattva that gives stability in life, that gives us the sense of clarity, that gives us the sense of connection. It's being comfortable in one's own skin, in one's own environment. That's what sattva represents. The most important thing is that in the conglomerate of what we are here to transcend, body, mind, and the senses, the important configuration here is such that our mind, in essence, in its nature, is sattvic. Our mind's nature is sattva, whilst senses ruled by rajaguna, and the body physiology is ruled by tamaguna, inertia. This is of importance because why our mind is never at equipoise is because our mind is taken out of its seat, according to the understanding, by the incessant activity of the senses. So mind, as it were, gets dissuaded. Instead of being what it is, reflecting the rays of absolute from pristine surface of what mind is, it is constantly rippled, constantly in motion, constantly fluctuating. And that what gives mind, what robs mind of its sattvic quality. It then becomes completely and utterly at the mercy of what mind considers to be where the satisfaction lies, in the pursuit of the senses, endlessly locked in that cycle. So yoga philosophy is very direct in that respect. And also because some other important factors also due to the lifestyle and the nourishment that we take, our mind becomes, on top of that, tamasic, ridden by inertia, heavy, and that mind cannot afford. So yoga philosophy therefore has this priority, eradication of tamaguna as a number one priority from the mind. All this depression, all this heaviness, heavy thoughts, heavy kind of predisposition, all this is a presence of tamaguna in the mind. Body, being an expression of tamaguna, is perfectly okay. That's perfectly okay. That's what body's purpose here is, body's role. So body get tired, you need to lay down and rest. You need to. Body is hungry, you need to nourish it. It needs to sleep. All this work ceaselessly. But mind cannot afford to be carrying the traces of tamaguna. So this is to the importance of Samkhya philosophy. This is to the importance of understanding what Samkhya deals with as that principle of Purusha, eternal spirit, and Prakriti, eternal nature. Because nature is also eternal. And there are scriptures, like for instance Patanjali Yoga Sutra is utterly and entirely an exposition of the key aspects, key points of Samkhya philosophy and what is the job. And the job is to separate Prakriti from Purusha, so as to abide in the freedom from all that what Prakriti represents. But it's dualistic. Why? Because it views Purusha as that eternal spirit and Prakriti as this world of forms and phenomena and everything we call phenomenal reality. It views them separately. Purusha is not involved. He stands aloof. He illumines everything, but Purusha is aloof, independent. So the highest achievement from the point of view of Patanjali's sutras, and this would serve us, what now we're doing, like a little detour, extended footmark, right, or extended notes, later on, because when we will return to the Samavesha, today or tomorrow, why Samavesha is supreme, this will become clearer, because we're speaking about this now. So according to the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, their exaltation, the highest goal is considered or seen in Kaivalya, abiding alone. This is the term, Kaivalya. The last pada of the Patanjali Sutra, last chapter, ends on that. The exposition, the sutras end on what is the purpose of the adept, is to abide in Kaivalya. This, of course, colored the whole spectrum of Indian spiritual landscape and society as well, because it also reinstalled the importance of renunciation. Some of you may have heard us speaking about it for a number of years, the distinction between teachings and how these teachings are taken on board and incorporated into the fabric of particular culture based on what is being considered, let's say, as the driving force, as the raison d'etre of why we're here. The reason why Indian culture is considered to be unique to this day is because it has societal place for renunciation. And this is reinstalled by the teachings of the 8th century sage Adi Shankara, who brought the purpose of life, the very purpose of existence, is the realization of the self. But it can only be achieved through renunciation, because Advaita Vedanta sees this as an illusion. This reality is of forms and phenomena is an appearance in awareness. It simply appears in awareness, but it has no reality of its own. Philosophically speaking, we can agree with a lot of that. There are overlapping territory between the Tantrism of Shaivites and the Advaita Vedanta of Adi Shankara, philosophically speaking. But in practical terms, it's a vast difference. In practical terms, your desire to have family is a waste of time. You're only postponing something which you're only basically getting enmeshed in what would have to be renounced. So that's where the youth went. I called it some 20 years ago, hiding in Brahman. The highest, most creative youth in India would only see the inspiration by abiding in Brahman. This is the highest goal. So this somehow, if so, those of you who have had the chance to read the Chamatkara, the Hidden Path book, we speak about it there, we speak to that in the book. This distinction is made. And why also the book itself, as it's to reinstate, to reevaluate, to sing the glory of the manifest reality, because it's an expression of awareness, not appearance in awareness. Do you see how fundamentally different these two perspectives? That's why one is called philosophy of householder and another philosophy of renunciate. And then, of course, this has cultural repercussions. And I argue that in the West, the philosophy of renunciation has no place. It has no place, it has no container. And there is a continued history of derailed army of spiritual seekers who are, as it were, we can call them casualties of the Age of Awakening, because they are being thrown on the periphery, thrown on the side roads in that highway of enlightenment. And derailed as they are, they seek help and most end up in psychiatric treatments. Stanislav and Christina Grof, well, they were still a couple, authored a book together, which was not authored, it was edited. They were the editors, which was a contribution of several key authors at the time, circa 1980. The book, it's called Spiritual Emergency. In fact, it is they who coined that term, spiritual emergency. 40-some plus years ago, they spoke to that. 40-some years already. So our voice only is continuing that work, continuing that separating wheat from the chaff. So you can mark in your journals, and like if this prompts some questions, because it's very important. Why am I making that important distinction? People study Advaita Vedanta. People sit with neo-Advaita teachers, with non-duality teachers, particularly the radical kinds. They don't know what to do with their lives, because the impetus, the impulse, gone. In fact, not only it's gone, it may not fully gone, but you don't see any meaning in that. The meaning is not there. The meaning of the renunciate, when he looks at the tree, is to look through the tree, as Maharishi Mahesh Yogi said. When the renunciate looks at the rose, at the flower, he's not even allowed to enjoy it. What do you mean? What do we mean by not allowed? The purpose is to see this as an appearance, epiphenomenon. You see? A renunciate only allowed to see the sap, because that's what the purpose of renunciation. If you study Advaita Vedanta, you will understand why. Whereas Kashmir Shaivism has a completely and utterly the opposite point of view. The whole point is in me beholding this flower for the fullness of what the flower represents. If you understand just this, you've made a tremendous leap in understanding in terms of what the Trika Shaivism truly represents and why it is chosen as an umbrella for this teaching, which I personally feel vibe, belief, and sense is a very timely teaching for us as we are faced with the deterioration of the fabric of our culture and society in terms of the utter and entire lack of the collective consensus of why we're here, even as earthlings. What is our purpose? So, back to the Samkhya. This was an extended, it's one of those scholarly books. You know, if we were to write the book, it will be like you come across the word and then it's like number 4, notes. You go into the notes and it's like page after page after page. Well, you see, because like you don't do your homework, what do I do? Skip that and then like, so Samkhya philosophy in a nutshell. Samkhya philosophy in a nutshell. Purusha, Prakriti. Prakriti comes from Purusha, that you can draw that infinity sign, but it doesn't go back to Purusha. It is not falling back into Purusha. It is not transcended into Purusha. Purusha remains one and only transcendent. See? So it's dualistic. It has 2 principles. But please don't scoff at it as non-dualists do. No, it's a supreme philosophy. It has its purpose. It's the part of the loop of the darshanas. There's no such thing in truly understanding Advaita Vedanta without understanding that how it is functions in the fullness of the darshanas. But our time and age is particularly known. The West has this knack. It goes to the unknown territory and skims the cream, scoops it. Not even that. It's like scoops the cream, it's not even the best metaphor. It often castrates the teaching because it feels it takes what it needs. It's very utilitarian, and it is rooted in that whole liberal democracy slogans because it meant to complete the incomplete sense of being individual. But it's an impossible job. Individual can never be completed. By the very definition, individual is incomplete. It's Shiva draws the veil over itself. So completing the individual is, at best, an oxymoron. So all these attempts at taking a bit of shamanic practices from there, taking a bit of Buddhism, taking a bit of Jainism, taking a bit of yoga, rampant. It's prevalent all over, you see? So of course Advaita Vedanta was like, yeah, Ramana Maharshi, bring him in, we've got the greatest apostle. You know, everything is like to the ridiculous. So going back to where we have started. So the importance of Samkhya also, and the genius of the way how Kashmir Shaivism as a philosophy was formed is such that Kashmir Shaivism has this unique feature of extraordinary ability of integrating everything, absolutely everything that is around. It's like, you know, when kids play, and when they're in this foray of playing, they assemble everything together. It doesn't matter, it's from this game, it's from that game. They're not homogeneous. Their sense of aesthetics are not going to suffer if they start using the pieces from the Jengai next to the cubes, next to the Lego, you know, and some rolls from the toilet paper will serve. And, you know, it's like here, and like kind of like, you know, scrambled scraps of paper and something else, and a box daddy left here, you know. Everything will work, no? In the same way, Kashmir Shaivism incorporated into the body of its system or its principal doctrines everything that was available in India at that time. So it likewise took Samkhya philosophy, but it gave it a spun. It incorporated the Samkhya, particularly the useful parts, the Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas All that is incorporated into the structures of yantra. Who is familiar with the yantric art? Yantric art is all based on that. It's Tantra. The color white stands for sattva. The color red stands for rajas. The color black stands for tamas. But also, you see, the juxtaposition here is neatly. White is representing the white of Shiva. Red is the Shakti. And black is that what stands for Nara, or individual. Or that what stands for the world. You see? That same Trinity here intact. So these three principal colors are used. These are the colors of the Indian Vedic deities. You look at it attentively, you will see. You will see the colors, the use of black, the use of red, the use of white. And of course the deep alchemical connotations as well. The sperm, the menstrual blood, and the mercury. Mercury. So, Samkhya philosophy is incorporated into the body of Kashmir Shaivism. And so the departure, we took that kind of, can you take me back when in your notes, when we started introducing the Samkhya?
Penetration, immersion, possession.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we will give our principal attention to these three aspects, right? And I suggested we talk a little bit more about the etymology, right? About the meaning of these terms. And also, even how they are translated into English language. Because the predicament of why we find ourselves here in this, let's say, condition which somehow is being referred to as being bound, is viewed differently from system to system. Most commonly, as you all know, ego is to be blamed, right? Like some teachers are just like, they make the teachings is very, very simple. So like, all the calamity, all the suffering is because of the ego. Ego is gone. Some even consider that to be enlightenment. Some even consider that to be freedom. This is a perspective. Of course, you can find these connotations in India as well, but not in any of the, let's say, schools, systems, and doctrines that withstood the test of time. No, ego is not blamed. Spiritual teachers will speak about that. That's a different point. It may incorporate and very often used in the discourse, but you will not come across ego being blamed for the calamity of ignorance. See? Superimposition, yes, that's where we left it. That superimposition, this is what superimposes our nature and therefore is spoken of in terms of mistaken identity. So that mistaken identity identifies with the body, mind, senses, conglomerate, and forgoes the essence. So often then there is this solution at hand, immediately spoken. So the job here is to disidentify with the body, mind, senses, so as for identity to shift to identifying with the eternal. And what is eternal here? That what is not touched by death and decay, right? So far this view is shared in many perennial traditions. Many perennial traditions. You study Sufism, you will see that in its own language, with its own terminology. We study many other schools of thoughts and systems, and we will come with that. You look into the teachings of some principal teachers of our time, starting with someone like Eckhart Tolle, that whole conversation of that mistaken identity. You see? Kashmir Shaivism operates with a slightly different and somewhat very interesting, fascinating, in fact, view on what comprises here, what ties the knots. Let's put it this way, I like it. What ties the knots here, what keeps things knotted. Everything is ruled by the power, the Shaktis, of language. It is the language that is blamed. Language, in other words, it's the domain of that what creates the concept in the first place. A concept, myriad of concepts, with which then identity with the body becomes only a matter of fact. And language seals that. So, by virtue of this whole thing, language, in fact, particularly, brace yourself, whatever we use on a daily basis is what continuously reinforces that what is, where the reality of who we are is hidden. We will need to go, of course, and look into the mechanics of that. The mechanics of how the matrix of creation is made in the first place. Suffice to add right now, for a future deeper exploration, that everything is made out of the sounds. We've established that on the first discourse. Everything is vibration, sounds. Everything is made out of vowels and consonants. As far as the Shaivism, vowels are expressive potentiality of Shiva. They are infinite. An open vowel, an open sound, has no end, unless it is collapsed into a consonant. That is clear, isn't it? So, and consonants are expressions of Shakti. So together, Shiva and Shakti form the matrix, where operating power of each particular vowel and consonant is carried by a particular power of Shakti. This is known as the science of Matrika, little mother, Matrika. So this little, because they are impenetrable to the eye, they are small, they are minute, they are very fine. So each and every sound is the expressive potentiality of Shiva and Shakti, carried out by these powers, which gives the appearance of reality for what it is. So reality is held literally by the sound vibration. And Sanskrit language is known for having the key to that, because it is in the structure. When the first grammarian, Panini, in India, came to systematize Sanskrit language, what he was perplexed with, above all else, is his task was to turn it into a grammar, tautable in schools. But it is a spiritual affair. It is something which basically dresses literally the creation into how it appears. So language here, language, is what holds everything together, both in terms of concealing and sealing reality, the essence of who we are. And likewise is also the key to go beyond. You see, the whole science of mantra is based on that. There is no way to separate the mantric science from the matrika. So of course this is where Kashmir Shaivism exalts in its understanding, because it brings the ancient Upanishadic teachings in the most accurate, full, complete, and undiluted manner. You see? The reality itself is considered to be made out of these sounds that are considered to be seed syllables. They are seed sounds. In that little seed, in that little bija mantra, like in scripture says, an enormous banyan tree is contained fully in its potentiality in a tiny seed of the banyan tree. So these bija mantras, these seed syllables, is what at the archetypal formation of universal structure itself, at the archetypal, these are the archetypal forces. So the mantric science is based on that. It's immediate penetration into the realm of where it was all constructed. You see? So this is for you to, for your awareness, for your understanding, that Kashmir Shaivism views this, what is spoken of as ignorance or not knowing your essence, not on the account of ego or just superimposition, but it is due to the operating powers of the letters, which is governed by specific qualities of Shaktis. And it's called altogether Matrika, the science of Matrika. I'll give you a little glance. Some of us who went through sadhana have the revelation of that. This can be revealed when Kundalini would fancy to do that. This science of Matrika is revealed within. And when that is revealed, the superstructure beneath the human body is revealed for what it is. Everything, every organ, every vertebra, every joint, every glandular formation is the result of the vibrations which becomes the gathering of divine entities, divine agencies. So let's just put pause here. Often we hear in our programs, even now, in this immersion, certain sounds are being shouted out, certain particular sounds. Sometimes it's almost as if someone is stuck on these sounds. This is all linked to that. It's all linked to that. I personally went through as if someone, because it felt like narrating a whole verses in Sanskrit when I would lie down and rest after program. It was this, like sometimes it was like, I think once I even thought, well, let me have a look, it's no harm. I know there's nobody there. Well, nobody, I told you so. So just lie down, rest, and enjoy the sound. Okay. In our programs, we had that as well. Someone would suddenly have this download of recitation, or even they would have these sounds repeated. So this is for you to reflect on and contemplate how reality is concealed. So reality is concealed, and in the same way reality is revealed. So the science of Kundalini is inseparable from the science of Matrika. So this whole iconography of the Shakti carrying the garlands of the letters. The Shakti is wearing the garlands of all the letters of Sanskrit alphabet. So she is the patroness and the guardian, the only one and the only who can give access to that. So you see, the picture is slightly different, and we, of course, will expand further. The notion of ego is dealt very simply in one sweeping way, and of course that does not mean that one dismisses anything that is done at the level of the individual means, where we ought to work at the level of emotional introspection, at the level of our reactions and responses, right? In other words, to see how we are we selfish in our acts, are we this and that. So, but there is no such thing as a kind of instrumentality of ego that can be held accountable. This is important. And I've spoken about it from day one. And it caused, I would say, a tremendous relief for many spiritual seekers who somehow came from the traditions where they locked horns with ego. I even gave these examples as a young man in the ashram. The whole conversation is like ego, ego, ego. You're off coming from your ego. Watch your ego. It is your ego speaking. And I once went for the walk on a beach, and it was just like, I just realized I'm freaking all but ego. There's nothing about me that is not me. Like, it was horrifying. It's like, and then I thought, how is it to be without ego? And of course, these revelations came, and then the confirmation came, is that it's always subjectivity of experience. So ego is a membrane that expands and contracts. And with the expansion of consciousness and contraction of consciousness, that's what happens to our experience. So many of us go egoless throughout the day at some point, and many of us experience acute contraction where we feel this and that, and that's in the nature of consciousness. Nothing to be ashamed, nothing to trumpet around. So this whole thing became acutely clear, acutely, very clear. Moreover, when I began to work, I've realized that all this, and that's linking together now the spiritual emergency, the cases of depersonalization turn out to be very, very common. So many people who have undergone genuine awakening, whether as an outcome, a result of certain practices or discourses, suffer from that undesirable condition. And it is undesirable. There's nothing liberating about depersonalization. And you would be amazed how many people are affected by that precisely because of the emphasis in certain teachings by certain teachers on that. I even came across of cases when people considered depersonalization to be the deal. But some depersonalization leads to complete and utter self-destruction. People who go through depersonalizations are at the highest risk of suicide. And this is also spoken in terms of people who are derailed, thrown on the side of the road to become an easy prey. They're like hit by the road to enlightenment. You know, like the roadkill, kind of, unpleasant metaphor, but I feel at times a fitting one. So energy is shifted somewhere else altogether. When energy is on ego, tremendous amount of energy is wasted on that, because what are you trying to combat here? Is your very own self. That's what in Kashmir Shaivism is spoken of as universal egoity. Going beyond the confinements of what we feel about ourselves is given throughout our every activity. From swimming to painting, playing any musical instrument, doing sports, being engaged in amorous affair, doing what you love, it takes us beyond identity. And in fact, it's a prerequisite. And even Eckhart talks about it now. Even Eckhart talks about it. Good old Eckhart talks about this just now, not just that he likes 2 glasses of red wine now more than before. So yeah, Eckhart, we're on the same page again. It's like, you know, like he's like this barometer of spiritual climate, right? So I kind of like went back liking Eckhart a lot, you know? He's like used to annoy me when I was younger, and I think as I am aging now, you know, like, this is a real deal. He speaks to that as well. Speaks to that, like how do you experience the egoless state? Well, whatever you do, what you love, you're egoless. You forget about yourself. And the whole point is then also, according to at least Eckhart teaching and a lot of, is to forget about yourself. Because we're so obsessed about ourselves, no? Eckhart launched millions of people on spiritual path, reminding them that it's like all this self-obsessiveness about this or that robs us of being present here and now. So, of course, and Kashmir Shaivism is, we could say, tad more sophisticated, and it deals with something which is at the mechanics of it all. At the mechanics of it all is this. Language, it's a domain of the language. Language rules the show. Why? Because language is an expression of consciousness. Language is an expression of consciousness. Metaphysically, esoterically speaking, it's an expression of Shakti. Language is a domain of Shakti. So the connection here is very, very neat, intimate, and even tight. And it is only Shakti that can loosen it up. If one understands what the principle of how the Matrika operates, and that's what it means to go beyond the matrix. This is what it means. And guess what? It's absolutely easily available to everyone, but it is just not convenient. If you are spending prolonged enough time in complete and utter silence, silence means also active silence is not passive silence, not reading even, not having anything to do with the language. It begins to happen. It begins to open up and recede. Prior to that, everything is language. Language, language, language. Everything is dressed in conceptual framework. When you come out of prolonged silence and mauna, there is no such thing as experience accompanied by articulation of any kind. This is the very distinctive sign of the impact of prolonged silence. If not, language is all there is. This is why silent retreats, in a way. This is why people eat in Mount Madonna, where we will go next year. There's 2 rooms in the dining hall, separated by thick soundproof glass. One is a silent room, one is the room for normal, let's say, interactions and eating. Because some people are in a silent retreat, they don't want to talk. They're not even allowed to talk. This is also speaks to that. See, there was something else I wanted to say when that example of the Mount Madonna and the so anyway, so that basically this worldly chatter. And this is, I said, brace yourself, because it's not something we like. It's not something is nice to hear, you see? Because also, how else could we live? But everything we speak on a daily basis reorganizes everything, you see? Ties itself back in. Like, for example, something loosened up there. And then you go to your business meeting. And you go for a coffee with your friend, and yap, you know, every bolt that loosened up, every knot that loosened up, is now being neatly So the whole thing is not, so remains intact. That's the domain of the language. So until the dismantling taking place, language will always reinforce ignorance. That's where we started the retreat, if you remember, when we spoke about truth expressed is a lie. Remember where we started? So this is an importance of also why now, in a positive sense, these attempts were made for cutting through casual conversation when you're in the ashrams, when you're in a spiritual setting, not a spiritual retreat, but like when you spend prolonged period of time. For example, if you pass by someone, you don't say hi, hello, hola, ¿qué tal? How are you doing? No, that's all. You see someone, you pass by someone, you don't want to ignore them, so See, it's like it's neutral. Of course, some people laugh at it, but this is giving you simply that additional understanding. What keeps everything, as it were, in charge and in control. So therefore, paradoxically, what we experience in these programs, all this speaking in tongues, all this verbal kind of diarrhea, forgive me at times what it sounds like, all this is samskaric cleansing. All this, it's like there is this accumulation of the sound, accumulation of all this information that is better off being without, and this facilitated by the field, facilitated by enlivened power, enlivened Shakti. See? Like Proverbs, if you don't know what to say, remain silent. Imagine, you don't know what to say, you still say something. It's like, something feels loose, alive. You don't know what to say. No? Well, let's tighten the bolts. Let's, tighten the construction. This is the way of the life. So very, very, very disheartening in a way at a face value. See? So this is where I invite you to contemplate and reflect on, because there are even expressions such as contemplative traditions, where one is invited to contemplate. Contemplation is not thinking about, it's simply contemplating, like empty-mindedly. Empty-mindedly. Learning and fostering the ability of remaining in a gap at will is a skill to be cherished. Being a prisoner of mental chatter is not a nice place to be. And what is amazing is that today the neuroscience comes up with these extraordinary conformations of all that speaks about, for example, how factually we can be productive. Factually, in terms of the brain activity, brainwave activity. And it's astonishing. It's very revealing. Like, as we try to be productive all along, and we try to also multitasking, apparently there is only this slim percentage of time when we actually can be productive. The rest is like we're just running around like a chicken without a head, trying to look busy. This is a neuroscience. It talks about it from a very different perspective. It talks about it from the actual activity of neurons and what have you in the brains. See? So this overemphasis of thinking, overemphasis on productivity is at the price. At the price of what? At the price of rise of hysteria and depression, at a price of the rise of all forms of mental disorders. All these, what certainly developed countries have horrifying statistics. Psychosis apparently is a global phenomenon. I'm not making it up. Psychosis among young people in particular. People cannot deal with the pressure of modern life and it results in psychosis. Why? Well, reflect on this and you're now equipped with some, you can start connecting the dots, you will see why. The less we are able to be in the present moment for what it is, the more quickly we run ourselves down to the level of paranoia. And psychosis is only the result of that. See? So, awakening truly and transformation of consciousness is a maturation of the soul. And at some point, being established at least, at the very least, on the level of intellectual understanding that our essence is eternal, should take off the edge of hurrying somewhere. Should take off the edge of not performing enough, but just enough to give that more movement, more space for movement, for air, for freedom, to breathe. And then, that in turn, paradoxically, and this is again going back to the modern neuroscience, is that when are we most effective? When are we most creative? I guess when? When we come from a prolonged enough period of doing nothing. The most creative state is immediately comes from a place when we are in a state of no pressure of any kind. This in Costa Rica I used to call hammock therapy, which puzzles me why there's no hammocks around here, because it should be in abundance.